Hello, Gary Jobson here with our continuous series with U.S. Sailing Starboard Portal. Boy, over the last couple of months, I've been so honored to talk to many of our great sailors, all Rolex Yachtsman or Yachtswoman of the Year award winners. And the conversations always seem to go in all kinds of different directions. And today, we get to talk with Jen French, who is a Paralympian, a medalist, and an author, and she'll be really interesting. I've got a lot of questions to ask her. But before that, I say that please, if you're not a member of U.S. Sailing, join us at U.S. Sailing, and if you're a member, please take the time to renew. I always put a little extra check-off box if you can add to the donation. It's appreciated. And some sailing is going on around the country. My wife and I actually did a race last week. It was called the Two Bridges Fiasco here in Annapolis, Maryland. And we had 140 boats or so, and we got 9th in our class. I had never raced our day sailor before. So very cool. So take a look at this. This is a book I wrote called Legends of American Sailing. And I wrote a section on Paralympians. And Jen, you look pretty happy in that picture. So why don't you tell us a little bit? Let's just kick off here with what's in your head during that moment when you got your medal.
Well, there's no denying it. It definitely was a spectacular moment. I think what made it even more special is to share it with my teammate JP. We were a pure team going into our campaign and all the way through. But I think a lot of times we only think about the people on the podium. And sometimes we forget about the support systems that are behind us to make it possible. So for our campaign, a lot of people think the core group was between JP and myself. However, our spouses were incredibly core pieces of our team. So they were always there to make sure that we were where we needed to be, to help us get to where we had to go, and to make sure that we were in a performance mode so that we can perform the way that we did to be able to make it to the podium.
Well, you look mighty happy in that picture.
It was a spectacular moment, and we were able to have family and friends there to share it with us, and I think that makes it so much more special.
And then a few months later, you were named the Rolex Yachtswoman of the Year.
Yeah, and I think, as I said in that speech, if you remember, is that behind every great woman, there's spectacular men. So we had a lot of them. Well, there were a lot of spectacular sailing women that helped us out as well. I think one of the things that we forget about campaigns is we always think of having just one coach. I think one of the things that made us unique is that we had a whole variety of coaches to be able to help us with our skill set. So that was definitely a lesson learned in our campaign.
Well, I was lucky enough to be the master of ceremonies at that luncheon way back. It was for 2012, so I guess we were January, early February of 2013 for that. And I did make a suggestion to the Rolex people after that. We probably should have had a few of these Kleenex boxes there, because after your speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. You really touched on everybody's emotions. It was pretty cool. Jenna, I'm kind of intrigued that before your accident, you really didn't do a lot of time sailing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was, before my injury, we were cruisers. We used to live up in New England and would cruise the coast of Maine every summer with my husband's family. Frankly, he's the one that taught me how to windsurf. So I was a windsurfer before my injury. So actually, in your neck of the woods, we would windsurf down at Tiverton, Rhode Island, and be able to get out there in the summer. So never really caught the racing bug until post-injury after we moved to Florida. And so being surrounded by water, you inevitably get an affiliation with the water, and that's what sparked it.
Well, I think anytime you can go cruising on the coast of Maine, that's pretty special. How did you do that pretty much every summer? Did you go up in Maine? And
almost every summer. It was frankly one of our best vacations ever, because it's far as long as you get to down east, there's a point where cell phones just don't work, at least at that time. So it was a great way to escape and be able to be out in the water in the rustic area and really immerse yourself in the local culture up there. So it's always a great place and a pristine place to visit.
You certainly learn to deal with tides and tidal currents when you're up in Maine.
Even when we went back after my injury, we had to be acutely aware of tides and currents, more so of tides, of just being able to get from the floating dock to land, because sometimes we just have to wait until high tide came in. So it tests your patience, but you learn a lot of it.
Yep. So let's just talk about how you became a Paralympian and the injury that you suffered some years ago. When was that? How did that happen?
Sure. So at the time we were living in Upper New England. We were avid snowboarders. So there was about a dozen of us that went out on the midnight run on a full moon, hopped on my snowboard and yeah, I went down to the mountain. So 11 made it to the bottom. I did not. I hit a patch of ice, kissed a bunch of trees, went down a 40-foot embankment, and came out a quadriplegic. So that was a shock in their life. But there's so many people with spinal cord injuries that have similar traumatic experiences.
Did it knock you out? It was nighttime. Were you knocked out or?
They tell me I was conscious. I only remember small pieces of that evening. And frankly, I don't want to remember all of that evening, to be honest with you. So, I do remember a couple of things of, waking up in the ambulance. I got a wonderful helicopter ride that I honestly don't remember, but they told me I was awake the whole time. So yeah, I think for some reason our minds like to block out some traumatic experiences, and there must be a reason why. So I choose not to know the details, but I know that it changed not only my life, but all my support system around me. It changed their lives as well.
Okay. Well, one last question about what year was that, Jen?
It was 1998, March 13th, Friday the 13th, under a full moon.
No.
So I just need a black cat or go under a ladder and I've got them all, right? So I have a trifecta. But yeah, it was 21 years ago, 22 years ago. So it's been a long time since my injury, but we never forget that date.
Right. So for Paralympic sailors, there's a scale ranking an injury or a disability. I don't know if that's the right word or not, from 1 to 7. So maybe just describe for our viewers how that system works.
So it's a functional assessment system. So it's not so much of, let's say for spinal cord injury, what your level is. It's really what function that you actually have. And there's several tests that go along with that. It's not just how they assess your function on land, but also your function out on the water, and what your capabilities are. So one is extremely impaired, where there's either you have impairments in your upper body as well as your lower body, or there's other sensory impairments, for instance, blindness, if you will. And then that goes all the way up to 7. So a 7 could be, a lower limb amputation, or even a type of upper limb amputation. So that's how they assess it. So 1 is the most impairment, and then 7 is the least impairment on the scale. But
where are you on the scale?
I was a 1. Mm-hmm. So I was a low level. So I'm a quadriplegic. Actually, it's known as a tetraplegia now. But I have impairments in all 4 of my limbs. So you might see me in a manual chair, so I can use my arms, but I don't have full function of my hands.
Right. Can you type?
I type in a weird way because I only have use of certain fingers. So it's something that I mastered early on. So I type in a very strange way and don't use all of my hands.
But you get the job done somehow. All right, well, let's shift. So you do some cruising in Maine, you have your accident, but then you got a vision that you want to step up your sailing and go from sailing down east to actually racing. So how did you make that transformation?
Yeah, so actually a prominent member of the U.S. sailing community, Pat Seidenspinner, they're family friends for a very long time, and they encourage us to look at St. Petersburg, Florida to move to, and encourage us to go to their sailing center. And when we moved here, that's where we went, and she was really the influence of us to join the St. Petersburg Sailing Center, and through that, we really caught the racing bug. And for a while, we really didn't have aspirations of becoming a Paralympian. It was more of, hey, this is a lot of fun, and we can just do our local stuff. But then we started to dip our toes into traveling events and international events, and we ended up, meeting Serge Jorgensen and Betsy Allison, and ended up in the international community. And from there, if you catch the bug of racing and you really love it, you keep taking it further. So, we really didn't get exposed to the Paralympic side until later on.
So what boats did you start out sailing? What adaptive boats was your first?
So the Sonar was the first boat that we went out on. My first race, my first regatta was in a 2.4. And yeah, so it was in a 2.4, and I actually have this picture still on my wall because it always reminds me of this. It was an older 2.4. I had duct tape on the bow. I had no foul weather gear. The timer I had on my boat was a kitchen timer from the local grocery store in a Ziploc bag, and it was my first regatta ever, and I was racing against Tom Brown. So anyone knows a prominent sailor from Maine, Tom Brown, who's also a Paralympian. He would lap me. So he would be lapping me on the race course, but of course, always giving me words of encouragement. But the picture I have on my wall is sailing in, being soaking wet with a huge smile on my face because I actually did my first regatta, and I was on a boat by myself after being told for so long after becoming a quadriplegic that I wouldn't do anything that's independent. And so this really kind of dovetailed and really helped me catch the bug of racing, but also build the confidence that you're still able to perform independent activities, and sailing really gave a venue to that.
So certainly in the 2.4, you were the helmswoman, but in the Sonar, were you steering initially, or were you crewing, or what was your role?
Yeah, I was steering. Occasionally I would go work the front and the jib, depending on how we were sailing, but usually I would steer. And then later on, we worked with Jean Hinkle to develop a transfer seat that would fit into the cockpit of the Sonar, and I would transfer from side to side very efficiently, by the way, because many times I can probably transfer quicker than an able-bodied person. Yeah, and I still have that seat, and still use it occasionally. But more recently, we've been testing out a seat for the J70, so similar concept, but a little different because it's obviously a different boat. But that's still, it's still, we're getting close to a final version.
So did you watch Nick Scanden and Maureen McKinnon when they did their campaign in '08? Were you following that?
Absolutely, yeah. And Nick was a good friend of ours, and Mary Kate, and we've sailed with Maureen before, so yeah, we were definitely following them, and we were trying to encourage them or help them out any way that we could, because Nick. I remember when Nick lost his first trials when he was early in his diagnosis, and it was a dream for him to be able to sit on a podium. So I think it was joy for everybody to see Maureen and Nick win that gold medal.
I actually got to sail with Maureen and a Scud. She was pretty good. Yeah, it was good fun. We were off Newport, and it was a nice breeze, maybe 14 or so, and it was really very cool. She was good at it, so I think she had a lot to do with their victory, their gold medal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thing that we always have to remember is a lot of times we only recognize one person that's on the boat or the person that's behind the helm. But the reality of it is, and I know you know this too, Gary, is that it's the team that's behind it. So, as I say, I can be a monkey in the back just moving the tiller, but if I don't have the team behind you that can be efficient and be able to work together, that boat's not going to go fast. Right?
So I'm not sure I like the name Scud, by the way. I know it's an acronym, but but it is a pretty cool boat, and they're fast, and they're safe, and they're comfortable, and they're very tactical, but there's enough things to do. But I know you did some adaptation to your boat specific to uh, your requirements. And so what were some of the specifics things that you did to your boat to help you out?
Yeah, again, it was actually adaptations for both me and for JP, because JP has a visual impairment. So for his upper seat, a lot of it was pulling the lines together so that he could make sure that he's pulling the right lines and be able to access those lines when he needed to, and be able to. He has very limited vision, so being able to see up close of where he was and those things. We also adapted our communication style on the boat, because there was a lot of chatter. Just because of his visual impairment, I had to be the two eyes looking out of the boat. So we did a lot of talking and communication back and forth. And then moving back into the boat, the seating system that we had for me, we tapped into again to the talents of Gene Hinkle and had a canting seat. But we also adapted and really I think did a pretty good job of perfecting the steering system on that boat. So earlier it was always a string steering, and with a keel boat, a lot of it is by feel and really understanding what that tiller feels like and what's the pressure on that rudder.
So
And
you're able to feel that. You have that feeling.
yeah, we came up with a rod steering and a direct steering system instead of a string steering system. So it made a really big difference on being able to do the finer driving in that boat.
Do me a favor, just describe what a canting seat is.
So it's a seat that actually moves from, it stays in the same place, but it actually cants, if you will, or leans from side to side. But it was done via batteries and motors, so it wasn't a manual system. So that added some weight to the boat, but we tried to keep the batteries as low as possible and to move the batteries as close to the keel as we could to keep the weight distribution. So
Did others have that kind of mechanism?
a lot of people had that same mechanism that had higher level injuries like myself.
So at the games, I did a little research here. At the Paralympic Games, you had a 3-1-1, 3-2-1, 4-2-3. 20 points in 9 races. It's very unusual. So that made me go look at a lot of Olympic scores and other Paralympic scores. And to average about a 2.15 or 2.2 is extraordinary. Last week I talked to Paul Foster and Kevin Burnham, and they won their gold medal with a 7.1 average. And you won your silver with a 2.1 or so. So you were pretty consistent.
We were consistent, but it also shows the level of competition that was on the water. That the Australians that won the gold medal, they were extraordinary sailors, and it's always fun to have really tight racing. So that's what we would have on the water is against the top teams. We were all always close. And I think one of the unusual things that happens in sailing, and I know this doesn't happen in all Paralympic sports or even Olympic sports, is that we're fiercely competitive on the water, but a lot of us are friends when we get on land. And I think that's the unique thing about sailing is that the inclusiveness of the various types of disabilities and also the inclusiveness into the able-bodied sailing community. But really that community spirit is something that's so unique about the sport that we should embrace.
Well, you did get 3 firsts out of the 9 races. So you were ahead of them at least 3 times, maybe more.
We were, but there were a couple of times we were in the lead and we lost it back. But you gotta brush those moments off and come back. One of my favorite stories from the games was the first race we had. The tensions are high, as everybody knows. The first race of a big regatta, and you're at the start line, and we had a beautiful start. I had a pole to leeward, and we were perfectly going off the start line with speed. It was a great start. We were really happy. but going off the start line, we lost our steering. So we had no steering. So all the other sailors sailed off, and we were still stuck back by the start line, wavering around. Long story short, we couldn't get out of our seats to fix it. So it was painful to watch. And I know for our relatives that were watching it on GPS, it was painful to watch. But eventually, we got the steering back. The first windward mark, we were, I think, second to last. We worked our way, and this is a real call out for JP and his attitudes on the boat is we brushed it off and we finished third on that race. So, it goes to show, even though, you might have a real bad screw up, to keep your head in the game and be able to make a comeback on the water.
Well, that must have given you a lot of confidence going forward to be stalled out in irons or something at the starting line, next to last at the first mark, and you pull up a third. That's pretty strong.
Yeah,
So
but it also
feel good at that point.
Well, it shows the value of having a psychologist with you when you're competing, to really look at the mental game that can happen on the water. So, we could have very easily had a mental breakdown and bad communication amongst us, and it could have turned
Who
out
was the
ugly.
Psychologist?
We had a couple of them. So Randy was our main guy, but yeah, we had a couple of them.
Randy.
But I think, I think if some of us were, I think our core team and our spouses, we were all our own psychotherapists too, because we would have unity sessions either on the dock or back at the condo, and we all got together. So we would talk through everything to make sure that we hashed out our emotions before we settled the day and moved on to the next one.
So in this classification system, the 1 to 7, where was JP, your crew? What number did he have?
JP was a 7 because
you were both. So he was at the other end of the spectrum.
He was on the other end of the spectrum. Exactly. So according to the Scud rules at the time, you had to have a 1 or a 2 in the helm seat, and then you could have any classification in the front seat in the trimming position. So JP was in a 7, but because he has a degenerative condition, he has retinitis pigmentosa. For each competition, he would have to go and meet with classifiers and bring in paperwork to show what his vision was, and that was just a double check to make sure that his condition remained stable while we were out competing.
Do people argue about their ratings?
Oh yeah.
I would think.
There is.
Oh, what do you mean I'm a 4? I'm at least a 3. I can see it.
Yeah, there is. I think there's the classification system is not perfect. I think it's a learning process, and I think it's one thing that needs to be really clarified going into into further competitions. If we want to look at bringing sailing back to the Paralympics, is really perfecting that and really clarifying it, so that there is some consistency. It's never easy to try to assess so much heterogeneity that exists within the community, but it's one of those points of contention. Yeah.
Well, when you try to handicap boats themselves, I have yet to hear a sailor be happy with the handicap rating that they actually have. 2 seconds a mile, it would have been okay.
So you're telling me it's inherent within our community that we don't want to have our.
Well, that's why I asked. It just seems. So,
yeah.
You've written at least 1 book or 2 books.
2. Mm-hmm.
2 books, and the first one, On My Feet Again. Tell me a little bit about your first book there.
Yeah. So my first book, On My Feet Again, was actually a story of my personal story, and with all the time that I had flying back and forth over the Atlantic Ocean, going for training or regattas or whatnot, I had a lot of time on the airplanes. So I would write various chapters of that book during that time. But it was really my journey of being in a clinical trial, of living with a spinal cord injury, of being a member of a clinical trial for a very innovative and invasive device, and what that journey is, and kind of disclose what it's like to be a research participant, but more so a member of a research team to be able to move technology forward. So it was a labor of love, but it was one of those things that we wanted to be able to tell specifically what that journey was, because I have an implanted neural prosthesis that allows me to use my paralyzed muscles to stand and to do other types of exercises like cycling and leg lifts and whatnot. So that technology is not just to build awareness of what it is, but also the benefits that might happen and what the next generations will be going forward.
How did you do with book sales?
We did pretty well. I can't complain. There was a book tour for a long time, so it was a lot of fun.
I have a copy here, by the way.
You do?
Yeah,
Excellent.
I got it off Amazon when I wrote the book here.
Oh.
I decided I better get your book and read up on you. So, but you've written a second book.
I wrote a second book. Yep. So dovetailing off of that, a couple of years ago, we wrote a book with a co-author of mine, James Cavuto, called Bionic Pioneers. So again, in the same theme of neurotechnologies, which are medical electronics that interact with the human nervous system, there's 10 short stories of people with various types of disabilities that use different types of neurotechnologies to impact their life. So for instance, Kathy was one of the first people to have a brain-computer interface and be able to interface with the computer just by thought. She had a brainstem stroke. Kim O'Shea was one of the first blind people to get the retinal prosthesis. So she's completely blind and be able to use an implant to be able to see black and white movement and starting to work on color. So these are the people that are really putting their bodies forward for science and really helping to move that technology forward. So one day we'll get to seamless technologies to help overcome several different types of abilities or disabilities.
One person I sailed with some years ago before he was injured was Christopher Reeve, who was an actor. He was in the Superman movies a couple times, and he grew up on the Jersey Shore like me. He spent some time in Bay Head, New Jersey growing up. And I was in touch with him after his accident. And one thing that I found interesting is he always had this hope that the technology would help him out eventually. He didn't make it. He had, other problems downstream, but he had that in your head. Is that something that is in your head, that technology will keep advancing and maybe help you even more?
It is. Actually, he was one of the early people implanted with a diaphragm pacing system that allowed him to start to breathe without a ventilator. Those are the very early days of that device. There's now several commercial companies out there. In fact, they're using it for COVID patients today. A company called Lung Pacer in Europe just implanted their first COVID patient to allow them to breathe off of a ventilator. So yeah, the technology is definitely advanced for a lot of various types of conditions. Are we perfect yet and seamless? No, but the technology is becoming much more non-invasive and less invasive. So we have injectables, or we have external devices that are being used today to help overcome a lot of type of disabilities. Specifically for spinal cord injury, there's a lot of advancements in epidural stimulation, in vagus nerve stimulation, and new rehabilitation techniques to help people with their early injuries. So yeah, the technology is very promising these days.
And I think one of the inspirational things for Christopher Reeves was, he was an ambassador, but he didn't seem to get down. He had a positive attitude, and that must have helped him along too.
Yeah, well, the mental side of things are always the challenge, right? I think a lot of times when people look at people with spinal cord injury, we only look at the paralysis of the condition, of what you see from a physical standpoint, but there's a lot of other hidden conditions that can happen. For instance, depression or anxiety can occur. For instance, I've had several sailor friends that have been afflicted with pressure sores. So they've been out of their chairs and out of the sport for a year or two just to be able to heal their bodies. So there's a lot of these secondary conditions that we don't necessarily see that really do impact our lives.
Mm. Well, the psychology helped you with your sailboat racing.
It did. It did. And I think it was Dave Perry that asked me this question of what's been my greatest challenge. And I always tell him is sailing with my husband, because, it's, you know, a lot of people say couples argue over finances, but we usually argue over mark roundings. So we say whenever you're out to dinner with us and you see us pulling out the sugar packets, just stand by, right? But it makes, it's definitely entertaining. And we do the same thing we've always done in our campaign, is that, you know, you leave everything on the water, and that's where it stays. So.
Are you doing any racing today?
Well, due to COVID, a lot of the racing has been
Right.
canceled. But we do get out on our WETA. So I haven't been doing the J70
On
racing.
your what? What was that?
We have a WETA. So a
Okay.
WETA is a little trimaran. It's about a 14-foot trimaran. It's a fun little boat. The name is actually a really ugly bug from New Zealand, but it's a fun little boat. That's a beach boat. It's very wet, apropos of the name, but it's a fun class, and it's perfect for Florida. So we'll launch them off the beach and go out sailing, you know, in days when the beaches are not that crowded, and we try to stay away from crowds. But you know, over the summer, Tim and I took the Dave and Dave webinar series, and you know, you can always learn something. So we've been applying what we learned from them out to try to perfect ourselves until the regatta season can kick back up.
And the trimaran's got good stability with the 3 holes.
It has good stability. The fun thing about this is that, you know, it's a multi-hull, so it's learning how to sail all over again. It tacks like a dinghy. So it's not like a typical, you know, catamaran that tacks a little bit differently. It has a gennaker, so you can get up and go going downwind, and it's just a plain fun boat. So you know, getting out in it and being able to play around is always a fun thing.
Have you had a professional career?
Which one, right? So
Before and after, I don't know.
Yeah. So before my injury, I was in the technology business, and eventually I stayed in that actually after my injury for several years. But I think I caught the bug of neurotechnology and this whole medical electronics, and I've been involved in this for the last 15 years in one way or another, either as advocacy and helping with the Brain Initiative, which took place in 2013. On to working with the regulatory agencies, doing publishing, market research, etc. So I've been really involved in that, and helping some of these small businesses get off the ground to be able to have access to the technologies that are being developed in our academic systems.
Where did you go to college?
So I went to, my undergraduate was in a little tiny college in Massachusetts called Bridgewater State. I think it's now called Bridgewater State University.
Okay.
Outside of Boston. And I have my master's degree, my MBA from Wichita State. So it's out in the middle of nowhere, but there's great winds there for windsurfing.
I've actually spoken at Wichita State maybe a half a dozen times over the years. And there was a professor there in aeronautics. They were really good with the aviation industry. I think he's long passed away, but so I got to know the place. And the one thing that intrigued me about Wichita is it's probably the windiest part of the country with the 24-hour winds. It blows 14 knot average 24 hours a day. You know, Newport or Annapolis, you get an afternoon sea breeze, but not 24 hours a day. So anyway.
So yeah, there's a lake on the west side of the city where a lot of people go sailing and enjoy that wind. So, you know, it's one of those things you need to embrace when you're there. It's not a deep lake, so there's a lot of catamarans and a lot of windsurfers when we were there. So, you know, back then I would be able to windsurf. You know, and today I haven't quite figured out how to adapt a windsurfer, but I think the WETA is probably the closest thing we've gotten to it as of yet.
Yeah. And the Scud's pretty good too, although it might draw a lot of water for that little lake.
Yeah, it does draw a lot of water. Exactly.
And then, but you've done a lot of writing. 2 books now. That's pretty good. Do you have a 3rd book in your head that maybe you consider going forward?
Well, there's always a book in your head, right? You know, Gary, you know that. You probably have several of them, knowing you. But yeah, there's always a there's always a book in the head of you know, what's going to be the next one. I think part of it is you know, I've been so immersed in the emergence of these small businesses that are coming out to translate the technology, which is really a result of the investments that were made back in 2013, 2014 with the Brain Initiative and the Brain projects that I get very immersed in that and really excited to be able to allow people to access the technology and see it transfer and being used by people who can really benefit from it.
Well, I was a recipient of some of this medical technology. I had a battle with lymphoma that went on for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the disease I had just maybe 10 or 15 years earlier, people didn't make it. And I was kind of on the leading edge of that protocol. And that was 17 years ago. And if I got it today, which I hope not, but if I did, you'd be able to extend even longer, you know, and less invasive treatment. So I understand that technology. You know, I'm sure at COVID, there'll be a vaccine, but it might not happen so quickly. I hope so, but we'll see. Are you being very careful these days?
Extremely careful, yeah. I was back in March. I was notified that I was at an event where there were positive COVID cases, so I had to self-quarantine early on. It's, you know, I'm usually on the road quite a bit, you know, several times a month, traveling from place to place, and I just haven't done that in the last 6 months. So it feels a little strange. I think I've lost my relationship with my suitcase, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you know, we make do. You know, we're talking online, which happens a lot these days. But you know, we're learning to adapt and change our lives. But yes, we are being extremely careful, wearing masks, wiping down everything. You know, as a wheelchair user, we get a little bit more exposed being out in public just because of the nature of the equipment that we use. So we just have to be extra careful.
So do you find the system okay traveling, going through airports and security lines and getting on and off airplanes and cars and travel? Do you find the system in America okay?
It's not easy to learn. Yeah, I think it's a learning curve to navigate it. You know, I've been fortunate enough that I live in Tampa Bay with a fantastic airport that makes it really easy to go in and out of. Not all airports are accessible, and not all airports are easy to get around. So it's a challenge. I mean, airports can be okay. Ground transportation can be extremely challenging. And even hotel rooms are not completely wheelchair accessible. So we have, you know, it's the 30th anniversary of the ADA this year. You know, have we made good strides? Absolutely. But we still have a lot of work to do.
I know here in Annapolis where I live, they, over the last 2 years, took all the sidewalks and made them, you know, kind of ramps on sidewalks, you know, and just for strollers and, you know, anything wheeling or your grocery, coming back with the grocery store, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a big project to do for every street corner, every sidewalk, but they did it. And I think it's made a little bit better. But we're revamping the Armory in Newport, Rhode Island for the National Sailing Hall of Fame and the America's Cup Hall of Fame. And we're going to make sure that it's compliant in every way in that building. So when you come visit, it'll be easy for you.
Oh, I hope so. You know, I'd love to visit it. I doubt I'll have to meet the credentials to get in, but you know, to be able to go and visit and see all the wonderful people that have been recognized in the sport and the achievements that they've made and the impact that they've had would be a great thing to see. Yeah.
I think you meet the credentials, you know, but you're young, you know. Those people that get in the Hall of Fame tend to be, I think you have to be 55 actually to get in.
Is that the inclusion criteria?
Yeah, no, well, that's one. But you're 55 years old, but and it's a career thing. It's not somebody that won last year's medal. It's, you know, what you did your entire life and career. And we need to get some more women in. There are several, but not enough. But I think that'll get over the next 3 or 4 years. I think we'll do some catch up there. So we'll get some more women sailors. Even during my career in sailing a long time ago, girls didn't have too much of a chance. They had some, but not enough in college. But today, I think the females have a lot of opportunity in the sport of sailing. And, we have equal numbers in the Olympics now. And in 2024, we'll have equal number of medals for men and women. So I don't think we're there yet, but we're doing better. So.
We've come a long way. Alison Jolly tells the stories of her Olympic experience way back when. So
I was there.
Yeah. So understanding what her struggles were, in her campaign, when we look at how far we've come, I think, we've made some good achievements. There's always a question of equality and equal treatment, and there always will be, not even amongst, male and female, but amongst racial disparities, that we have to think about those types of things and how do we make our sport more inclusive, not just for people with disabilities, but people of different races and ethnicities. And I think it gives us an opportunity to expose the sport and what we learn from the sport in so many ways that you can apply to everyday life.
Well, sailing, I don't think we're perfect yet, but we're closer today than we were a few decades back. And Alison Jolly and Lynn Shore, their final race in the Olympics Games was quite a story. They were short a silver medal, but they wanted a gold medal, and their halyard was coming down on the jib, the mainsail was coming down, and what do? You capsize the boat, and it was blowing 25, maybe 30 knots, and these huge waves, and they finally just stopped and yanked it up and got the thing going again. And by the time they did all that, they were pretty much in the back of the fleet, and the visibility was bad. And they just, like you did in your first race of your Paralympic, they marched through the fleet and got the job done and ended up with a gold medal. And I was on the float or on the ramp when they came in. I think it finally dawned on them that they'd actually won the thing. Anyways, it was a pretty exciting moment to do that.
Yeah. And, that sportsmanship and that teamwork is what really kind of shines, I think, for a lot of our team boats that we have in the Paralympics, but also all over our racing community, whether it's a local race or whether it's a national or international race. Yeah.
All right. Your husband doing okay? Tim is his name?
Tim, yeah, Tim's doing well. Yeah, he still tolerates me and our Weta, so that's a good thing. But our lives have been impacted because he's not flying either. So we've come to the point, I think, which is I think we're fortunate enough that we live in Florida and so close to the water that we take it as a mental break for us to try to get on the water at least 2 times a week. And make that point, because not just for our own sanity, as we say, but just to be able to reconnect with being on the water as used to being on the water so much. So I think for a lot of the sailors out there, we all have this connectedness to being on the water and to knowing what it feels like. So I think it's good for us to get back out, and frankly, we can socially distance out on the water, especially when you're in a small boat. So
I think that's the name of my next boat, Social Distance. I have to admit, I have not actually missed being on airplanes. I get weary of the whole process.
Oh,
airplanes.
Well, my husband's a pilot, and I'm a
He is?
private pilot. Yeah, so we're both flyers. So being in the air. In fact, I think I've jumped out of one of his airplanes before. Yeah, when he was flying, I said, "Get me out of here," and I jumped out. No, I'm kidding.
You've gone out with a parachute?
Yeah, I've gone with a parachute. Yeah.
Where do you keep your silver medal?
Oh, I keep it in a safe place now. And actually, I have a local jeweler that's always told me, he's like, I'll put it in a case for you when you're ready. But one of the fun things to do that really grounds you is I still meet up with elementary and high school kids, and and just to have them understand that even if you have a physical disability, you can still make achievements and get a type of Olympic medal. And I'll tell you, that's just, it's fun. It's fun to do that, and to hear all the questions that they ask, and to see a lot of their eyes light up of, you know, maybe they're living with something adverse in their lives and they might be able to change it around. Right.
So it must have some nifty graphic and logo, London 2012 on your medal.
It does, yeah. It's some bling, that's for sure. It's heavy, so you know.
Well, it should be.
Yeah, it definitely weighs quite a bit, but you know, the uniqueness of a medal, and being able to take it around to kids so they can really and kind of understand what that means to represent your country, but also, you know, the work that goes behind it, and understanding the discipline that you need to be able to achieve that level.
Well, Jen, I love the way on this talk you've spread the kudos around to your team and everybody that helped you out. And yes, you're the one that got the steer, but there was a good support system behind you to make that happen. And your writings are inspirational. Your speaking's inspirational. And I'm glad you're still out there in the water. So let me just say thank you very much for taking the time. I hope to see you again in person sometime. You know, we've
I hope so.
met several times over the years, and this COVID thing lifts over our heads, and I'm sure I'll see you at some event, something in the near future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. It was great to see you, and big hellos to the sailing community out there. And hopefully we'll all be on the water and racing again and enjoying our sport.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.